Ago, Medasi, Aquaba, welcome. We hope that you are certainly obtaining your highest level of mental, physical, and spiritual health on this Sunday. And we are so honored and excited, happy that you have decided to spend this hour with us for this very critically important topic matter for this August 8th, 2021 edition of Our Ancestors' Voices. Today, we are going to commemorate Black August, and we are just so glad that you are here to help us do that, to honor our elders and ancestors who had the audacity to stand up against empire. So we are so thankful to be able to honor them and to do our very best to continue to make contributions to the work that they made such a major impact on. And we start, as we always do, by paying respect and honor to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, all of the actual indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. We are talking about the people who call themselves American Indians, Native Americans, Chicanos, Mexicanos, Puerto Ricanos. Those are the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. If you're not a part of that family, you are not indigenous to the Western Hemisphere. We come to smash that confusion right now. And we pay respects to the indigenous people and their just quest to fight to get their land back, because these lands that we're in the Western Hemisphere, from Alaska down to Chile and everywhere in between, the Caribbean included, are the lands of the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. They don't belong to anyone else. And anti-colonial struggle is about the people who were colonized and had their lands taken away, thus drastically impacting their ability to achieve self-determination. Obviously, the correction to that is the fight to return these lands to the people they were stolen from. So that's what we're concerned about. If that does not include you, then we're not concerned about your feelings or, what are you going to do when that happens? If you do the right thing now, you shouldn't have to worry about what you're going to have to do when that happens. And also, we pay nothing but honor and respect to our African ancestors, who are really the only reason why we are here today. If you're here today, it's because one of our ancestors stood in line and took a blow so that your ancestors, your family could continue to live and exist here today. So only a fool, if you know that history, only a fool would wear a shirt that says something like, "I'm not my ancestor." We've talked about that so much in these weekly broadcasts, and just to say, anybody that promotes that kind of backward message is just confused about who they are. So we honor our African ancestors. We know that they are the reason that we're here, and all we want to do is, again, continue to contribute to the sacrifices that they made to push us forward towards justice. So we're thankful for you all being here. Of course, yesterday, August 7th, was the 51st commemoration of the Marin County Courthouse incident, where young 17-year-old Jonathan Jackson went into the Marin County Courthouse and was able to obtain the camaraderie assistance of William Christmas, James McClain, and of course, Ruchell McGee. And we know Jonathan Jackson, William Christmas, James McClain lost their lives that day in that incident designed to take over the courthouse and ultimately lead to the freeing of Jonathan's older brother, George Jackson. Ruchell McGee remains in prison 51 years later as a result of that incident. And of course, a year after that, on August 21st, 1971, George Jackson was assassinated in San Quentin prison. And so the Black August institution is designed to commemorate those events, as well as other political prisoners that fought in the African liberation struggle, as well as other political prisoners as well who are not African. Of course, we always include honored warriors like Leonard Peltier, the great warrior for the American Indian movement. When we talk about Black August, we're talking about Leonard Peltier, Sister Tarina from Puerto Rico, and all of our indigenous comrades as well. We include them as much as anyone else that is African. So we're thankful that you're here to commemorate these brave warriors with us. And we start with just our humble introductions that we do each week. And so let us do that. I am a longtime organizer for the AAPRP and glad to be here to carry on this tradition. This is our 81st consecutive week broadcasting. And if the ancestors will it, we will continue for as long as we have breath in our body. And with me, joining me as she does every week, is my daughter, Shukura, who is a product of the All African People's Revolutionary Party's Young Pioneer Institute, and continues as an adult to function as an organizer within the AAPRP, obviously doing this work that we're doing right now, as well as pursuing her studies so that she can continue to make her contribution that way as well. The objective of the All African People's Revolutionary Party, again, is Pan-Africanism. Pan-Africanism, one unified socialist Africa. The book on the right, Kwame Nkrumah's Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare, lays out our strategy for achieving Pan-Africanism. But I'll just give you a quick example, since we've seen the Olympics happening, the Summer Olympics happening over the last 2 weeks. Is imagine this: I watched the race Friday night for one of the relay races, the women's relay races, and the contenders for the medals, or the actual teams that ended up getting the medals, were a relay team of African women from Jamaica, a relay team of African women from Britain, and a relay team of African women from the United Snakes of America. So imagine this. Imagine, if you want to get a vision in your mind of what Pan-Africanism would look like. Imagine if, instead of us representing all of these colonial countries that the only reason why we're there is because they kidnapped our ancestors and sabotaged our economy so that they could control the wealth that the places that we're from produced. Imagine that instead of that, we had one African team that competed in the Olympics, regardless of where we're born, because it doesn't really matter where we're born, because where we're born is a reflection of colonialism. It's a reflection of kidnapping. You know, a person in prison doesn't define their identity based on the prison. So for us to define our identity in 2021 and beyond based on where we're born is the logic of an insane person. Clearly, that should not be how we define ourselves in a healthy manifestation. Clearly, the healthy manifestation of how we define ourselves is as African people, no matter where we live on Earth. So imagine if African people, we had our own Olympic team. Just using the example I gave of the sprints or any other of the events during the Olympics, there wouldn't be too many medals to go to too many other folks. Well, if you translate that to the political and economic reality of a United States of Africa, with the same conditions applying, then it shouldn't be difficult for you to understand why we say, until Africa is free, no African anywhere on earth will be free. That's where our power is. And so that's why we fight for that objective. And we have chapters worldwide in relationships with other liberation movements, the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere, the Irish Republican Socialist struggle for justice in Ireland, the Palestinian struggle for Palestine to be relinquished by the Zionist occupiers, the struggle for national liberation in the Philippines, and so on and so forth. So these are all just and legitimate struggles, and a victory for them is a victory for us, and vice versa. So we work hand in hand with all of these movements. So again, we thank you for joining us to talk about Black August today and commemorating our freedom fighters. And to get us started, I'm going to turn it over to Shukura.
Good afternoon, good day, good evening, all. I second what my dad was saying, and I just want to continue to pay homage not only to the warriors who have helped us to be where we are today, but also just acknowledging those who are left unnamed. So, those warriors who stood up and fought for our rights that we don't even know their names to be able to give them homage and clarity and acknowledgement. I thank our ancestors for putting themselves on the line and for understanding that for them it was important. And so, understanding what it means to stand up for something, even if other people are pushing against you, or even if you're unsure if what you're doing is the right thing, still having the courage to stand up because deep down in your heart of hearts, you know that what you're doing is right. Just like we think about our comrade Carlotta that we talked about a couple of seminars ago, and we think about our comrades who were working with us to help resist colonialization and neocolonialization in the Congo, as well as in Kenya and other parts of Africa. And we think of our comrades in the States and the pushback that they gave against oppressors, and just all these different people who, no one decided to say, Malcolm X, you're going to be born and you're going to do X, Y, and Z. Malcolm X had to take the ancestors communicating with him and helping him to understand his path, and he had to take the lessons from values from his parents, and he had to take his village that raised him, because we do believe that it takes a village to raise a child. So all these different contributing factors made Malcolm what he was, and all these contributing factors made Carlotta what they were. All these contributing factors make me who I am, and all these contributing factors make you who you are. And so I think it's important that we try to remember that, because the time has come, family, for us to stand up. And so it's not really a question of us just remain seating anymore, and it's definitely not a question of us straddling the fence. We're going to have to take a side. And if you are oppressed in any way, shape, or form, then it seems pretty clear to me that you know what side you need to take. And if you're unsure how to go about doing that, at 81 weeks of us doing these seminars, there's definitely some resources out there where we can further assist. But we do ask you to first just take a stand. First, just stand up and speak out against what is not right. And that it by itself is the first step. Excuse me. So we have to remember that there has to be courage within us, because we know that what's happening is not right. We know that the backlash that Cuba is getting is not right. We know that the blockade with Cuba is not right. We know that. So that means that we have to speak out against that. And to speak out means risking being uncomfortable. Speaking out means risking being unpopular. Speaking out means risking being put on the spot where people might try to push against you or resist what you're saying. But if you truly do your research, and again, you use the resources we've shared for you, like the Grandma website and other websites, then you have facts with you, and you have facts under your belt. And so, therefore, you don't have to worry too much about resistance from the population that you're speaking to, because you've done the science and you've looked at the science and you know that the numbers aren't lying. Why? Because the Grandma website is one example of Cubans actually talking about what's going on. So if anyone knows best what's happening in Cuba, they would, right? So that's asking a lot of some of us, because we've never really had to take a stand. But the time has come where we don't really have a choice anymore, because we're literally dying, literally. Like, people are literally losing their lives as we speak. And so when more of us stand up, and when more of us rise up and we push back against these quote unquote social norms of killing people, then we're going to start to make it harder for the system to just continue killing us like we don't matter. And once we do that, then we can actually start to have some organizing conversations, because what's happening in Africa is the same concept that's happening here in the States. It's happening in Israel, it's happening in Palestine, it's happening with the indigenous people, it's happening in Ireland with the Irish people and them trying to get their land back. It's also happening in the Philippines. It's happening worldwide, family. It's not just happening in Mississippi. It's not just happening in the Congo. It's not just happening in Palestine. These are connecting issues where poor people or people who don't have access to their land are being victimized and exploited based on their resources and materials that their land provides them, but they themselves don't have access to the benefits of that exploitation. And so we need to rise up and push back against that, because that's problematic. And anyone who is entitled to their land should have access to it. So We have to remember that despite our personal and emotional desire to connect with people we know who have decided to ride with the instruments of imperialism, the unquestionable truth is conscious or not, dedicated or not. All representatives of the US military, police, etc., are using violence to continue to perpetuate the capitalist system, which is responsible for a level of death and destruction that is unprecedented in world history. Therefore, objectively speaking, we can never see anyone carrying out that terrorist work as someone worthy of honor. Driven out of confusion? Yes. Economically extorted into their actions? Yes. Worthy of honor? Absolutely not. We are not trying to be flip here, but drug dealers are forced into their destructive behavior due to social conditions too. But we don't honor them for what they do. So excuse us if we refuse to honor anyone who follows immortal orders to kill and fight against people who are only standing up for their dignity and self determination. So, unlike so many cowardly people who pose as people committed to justice, we have no problem saying loud and clear that you should go and get your loved ones who are unfortunately representing state institutions for imperialism. They are not heroes, and what they are doing has absolutely nothing to do with any freedoms we have obtained. This is a complete lie that is shoved down our throats by the capitalist imperialist system. But as Sekou Touré taught us, quote, one truth will crush 1,000 lies, end quote. The honor we offer is reserved for those people who are courageously standing up against this capitalist system, demanding justice for all of humanity. Next slide, please. Do you wish to know who we consider our troops? The glorious freedom fighters for the African Party for the Independence of Guinea Bissau, like Sister Theodora Gomes, who participated with the armed struggle against the Portuguese to free Guinea Bissau from colonialism. Thank you, Comrade Theodora Gomes. This historic sister just participated in our International African Liberation Day program 2 months ago. Comrade Fernando Flort, who courageously went against and went undercover in Miami in order to gain information on US terrorist attacks against socialist Cuba. And if you all remember, Comrade Fernando went so far undercover because he needed to protect his family as well as loved ones that he wasn't even able to tell his family what he was doing. So even his family, who had known him all of their life, thought that he had lost his mind and gone crazy because he was suddenly pushing imperialist questions and suddenly supporting imperialist endeavors and capitalist endeavors. And they knew that that wasn't his characteristic or his normal lifestyle. So they were trying to figure out what was going on. He wasn't communicating with them. And so, again, like, that's the kind of stance that a true warrior takes, because not only are they willing to understand that they are sacrificing a tremendous amount, but they also understand that they could die in that process of doing that. And they're still willing to do it. Why? Because they see that them standing up is going to help the unborn children of tomorrow's future have a better life and have a better world to live in. Or they understand that them standing up will help the born children have a better life and a better future of tomorrow. So being able to understand that and taking a stand and not being afraid of what the consequences, including death, might be, is extremely sacrificial. And so that's why they are our warriors. That's why we continue to acknowledge them. And they even understand that that means sacrificing their family's well-being. They understand all of that because they're trying to look at the greater amount of mass people who can be impacted by the choices that they're making. So take Comrade Fernando, for example. His efforts, he spent 16 unjust years in the US prison. The unselfish 500,000 Cuban troops who sacrificed everything to fight against racist mercenaries in Southern Africa. The courageous soldiers of the Pan African Congress of Azania, or the colonized term, you know it as South Africa. Our families in the Democratic Party of Guinea who bravely challenged French colonialism and then continued to serve as a base against international imperialism. So we're talking about our warriors who fought from Cuba to make sure that there were no mercenaries in Southern Africa. We're paying homage to our Pan African Congress and the military that they had to help us in Africa. And then, of course, we're acknowledging the Democratic Party of Guinea and how they resisted and refused French colonialists from coming in and trying to do what they needed to do. And now they're continuing to resist that on an international imperialist level. For our elders and ancestors in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the Black Panther Party, the Black Liberation Army, Universal Negro Improvement Association, Land and Freedom Movement, Mau Mau in Kenya. These organizations and many others stood up, and many continue to stand up against imperialism. Every right we have, every opportunity we possess, we owe 100% to these courageous people who sacrificed everything for justice. They sacrificed everything for us. And some of us have not had the chance to even meet these comrades. So it's not even about them sacrificing for people that they know. It's not about them thinking about it from an individualistic perspective and doing something because they personally know that the benefits will help their sister or their brother or their family who might be non binary. But they're doing sacrificial work, and they have done sacrificial work for people that they don't even have a chance to have met because they still are thinking about the greater good for the greater amount of people. We owe everything to them. And we are so grateful that they have chosen us over imperialist capitalist dollars. We are so grateful for that. They deserve the honor and respect so many of us mistakenly direct towards forces of injustice. And if we may, we would like to humbly add the following to our distinguished list of honorable soldiers: the Palestinian Liberation Organization, we thank you, and the Palestinian Resistance Organizations, we are grateful. The Irish Republican Socialist Party, we are grateful and we thank you. The International Coalition of Human Rights in the Philippines, we thank you and we are grateful. The American Indian Movement, Red Nation, and other indigenous organizations fighting for land reclamation and the return of indigenous territories to the indigenous nations. We thank you. All of these forces fight against injustice, and that qualifies them as our troops. Every day, all day, this will be true, despite the propaganda thrown at us 24/7, 365 days a year, to try to convince us to buy into imperialism's plan to justify their terrorist attacks everywhere on the planet Earth. And so, again, I invite you to think about how they did not have the opportunity to weigh the advantages and the drawbacks. Some of them may have had the opportunity, but I strongly doubt it allowed them to change their ideas or their choices. I think they still understood I can die and I can lose everything if I decide to take this stand, but I'm still going to do it because I believe that this stand is what's going to keep me humbly and humanely right. And when I die, people will know that I did what I did because of my love for humanity. And so it's ultimately a question that you have to ask yourself, family, is what are you willing to sacrifice? Now, that could be a rhetorical question, but I think ultimately it comes down to you understanding, as we've said before, you cannot think from an individualistic standpoint if you consider yourself a humanitarian. If you consider yourself down for humanity, then that means you have to think about humanity, which means not putting yourself first. That means you have to understand that choices you make are impacting other people behind you. Choices you make are influenced by the people who came before you. So it's literally impossible, as my dad already stated, for you to not be your ancestor when we learn from the people who came before us. We learn from their actions, we learn from their diaries, we learn from their journals and documented evidence that they have provided for us. How are we going to know what to do if we don't look to the past to see what others have done before us? So you cannot not be your ancestor, because how would you know how to do anything as a human being without them? They literally gave birth to you in addition to helping you from an ideological standpoint develop your stance and your perspective on the world. I thank you all so much, and I continue to celebrate with you as we honor our troops, those that we know of and those that are remain nameless. Asante Sana.
Thank you very much, Shakura, for a wonderful foundation for our commemoration of Black August today. I mentioned in the beginning, Comrade George Jackson, or the Dragon, as they used to call him. And you see him in the picture on the left, being led by Gestapo guards in the prison system, in the latter period, right before he was assassinated. And again, we just want to go back and give the foundation. Shakura talked about all of the different organizations that represent the spirit of Black August. And we want to just take it back to those initial days of 1970, the Marin County Courthouse shootout with George's younger brother, Jonathan Jackson, and the assassination of George himself, little over a year later, and just talk about how Black August as a concept originated around those martyrdoms, and the fact that those Africans really decided to take serious action to try to challenge the system. If you know that history, you know that George Jackson was originally incarcerated in Soledad prison here in California. And when he was there, he came under the tutelage of another African named W.L. Nolan. And W.L. Nolan played somewhat of a mentor role to George. And from that work, they began to work together along with other Africans like Fleta Drumgo, and others. And so a European guard was killed, lost his life at Soledad prison. And George, W.O. Nolan, and the other, Fleta Drumgo and the others were deemed, there were 6 of them deemed the Soledad brothers as a result of that. And the death of the guard resulted from some incarcerated folks that were viciously murdered by the guards before that. And so this guard fell off the top tier, 3 or 4 tiers, and perished. And so they were indicted for that charge and were brought up on additional charges as a result of that. And this led to a lot of support for them on the inside and the outside, as well as the eventual action that young Jonathan Jackson took part in on August 7th, 1970. Now, it's important to note that George Jackson and W.L. Nolan and the work that they were doing was interesting and unique in the sense that they were going against the codes of the United States prison system. The United States prison system everywhere, and particularly so here in California, because a lot of the prison systems in the country are modeled after this one, because there's more people incarcerated by far here in this state. There's more people in the state. Well, they're always organized around race. Like the way they maintain control of the prisons is by promoting racial antagonisms among the people incarcerated, because they know that if people united beyond quote unquote racial lines, that it would be very difficult for them to maintain control over those institutions. So they constantly use race and race antagonisms, and they constantly perpetuate those antagonisms to ensure that this doesn't happen. And so the unique approach that George Jackson and the others were engaged in were organizing beyond racial limitations. And this was borne out after Comrade George was assassinated on August 21st, 1971, when the Attica prison uprising took place in New York. And if you have studied that uprising, you know at least 2 things about it. One, that the repression effort orchestrated by then New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller was designed to completely snuff out any question in anybody's mind about what would befall you if you decided to take on the state. So when they unleashed fire on those incarcerated persons that had taken over Attica in response to George Jackson's assassination clear across the country, they didn't care. They knew that they were, there were guards and other prison employees who had been taken hostage, all of which, reported publicly that they were treated humanely. Nobody was abused in any way whatsoever. In fact, what they talked about, the people who were employees of the prison, was how much they couldn't believe the brutality that was inflicted by the state against everyone there. They murdered dozens of people involved in the uprising, as well as prison employees and guards. They just didn't care. And the reason why they did that is because they wanted to send the message that if you stand up against us, this is what will happen to you. And they were especially afraid then, as they are today, of the multiracial solidarity that existed in the Attica uprising. This is something that didn't have a history in prisons in this country, and since 1971 hasn't had much of a history. And so this is what they're afraid of, and this is the legacy of George Jackson that really comes to define the power of what was represented in commemorating Black August. And of course, we know, the movement has evolved since then beyond just the events in August of 1970 and 1971, as critically important as those events are, to looking at the mass incarceration system for everyone who's incarcerated. And Geronimo G. Jago, or Geronimo Pratt, as he was formerly known, who was in prison 27 years on trumped up counterintelligence charges by the FBI, said upon his release from prison in 1997 that everybody in prison is a political prisoner, because if people had different economic conditions and realities outside of the exploitative and oppressive capitalist system, then they would make different choices. And so the fact that they're in prison is a reflection of the systemic reality that they existed in. So that makes it a political question, which we agree with that statement 100%. So when Geronimo says that, that makes sense in terms of understanding how the perception of Black August has evolved to be a question of challenging mass incarceration in this country. This country imprisons more people by percentage than any country on earth. Even with China, the numbers are comparable, but China has so many more people. China has 1 billion and almost 2 billion, approaching 2 billion people, whereas there are 350 million people in this backward country. So this, you can't, they try to confuse people. Well, China has more people in prison, but that's a false equivalent. See, so we're looking at this entire system, which is figured out that incarcerating people is profitable. And so it's profitable to put people in prison. So that's what they do. And everything is designed to put people in prison. Being poor is extremely expensive. And that's because the conditions are set up to ensure that if you run into any type of difficulty in this system, you get a warrant, you get a charge against you, you have fines, you don't pay them, a warrant can be issued for you, you can go to jail. And that's how they keep people in this incarceration system, because the overwhelming majority of people who are incarcerated are not there for violent crimes. This is true, no matter what they lead people to think. In fact, I think they even have to exceed to that point, because you don't even see these reactionary politicians talking about crime. Back in the 80s, that was their main election talking point. Crime, we got to stop crime. Basically, they're saying we got to stop these Black and brown folks. That's the code. But they don't even use that anymore, because it's not even a thing like it used to be. People are in prison for drug use and intention to sell drugs. That's about almost 65 to 70% of the people who are incarcerated in this country right now, which is absolutely insane, because we know that given the opportunity to participate in qualified and supported treatment programs, people successfully avoid recidivism, meaning they avoid going back to prison after they're released. That's clear. The data clearly supports that. But the problem is that programs are not supported because that's not, again, as I said, incarceration is profitable in this society. So these people want to continue to put people in prison. So if we look at, some of the people who should be honored, a lot of people, there's not enough room on a slide to put the names of all the people that are not there. Again, we mentioned Comrade Leonard Peltier of the American Indian Movement that's been in prison since 1976 on clearly illegal and trumped up charges that are rooted in the deaths of 2 FBI agents who were illegally on the Pine Ridge Reservation territory, should not have been there in 1975, had no legal jurisdiction to be there and no probable cause to be there, and were there with weapons, were there harassing people in the environment. You have to know the environment at Pine Ridge. During that time, Pine Ridge, South Dakota Reservation had the highest murder rate of any place in the United States and this was because of the war being waged by the Federal Bureau of Investigation and their goon squad, or what they called the Guardians of the Oglala Nation, which were what my indigenous comrade friends told us were apples, red on the outside, white on the inside. We call them Oreos, black on the outside, white on the inside. Our indigenous Latino comrades call them coconuts, and our Asian comrades call them bananas. But the point is that this goon squad was made up, armed, trained by the FBI to terrorize the people of the Pine Ridge Reservation, to try to intimidate them away from supporting the American Indian Movement's critical work there during that time. And after this shootout, the people who actually executed these FBI agents have long ago, in the 90s, early 90s, come forward and admitted their role in doing that. And the FBI has ignored this because they wanted to get Leonard Peltier, just like they wanted to get Fred Hampton and Bunchy Carter and Geronimo G. Jaga. They wanted to get Leonard Peltier as someone who was one of the main security people in the American Indian Movement, just like they wanted to get Anime Picta Aquash, who was also a national leader and a critical security person in the American Indian Movement. So they got what they wanted when they murdered Comrade Sister Anime Aquash, and when they arrested and convicted Leonard Peltier. So that's why it stands. But just looking at, again, some of the people on the screen, Mumia Abu-Jamal, who was a Black Panther at 15 years of age, and then became a journalist and was instrumental in exposing the Philadelphia, Pennsylvania United Snakes repression against the MOVE organization. And you have the people from MOVE down at the bottom who just recently were released after so many years in prison. And then the photo at the top center, Russell Maroon Schultz there. And then to the right, Sundiata Akoli, who was in the car with Comrade Sister Assata Shakur, and effectively who has been in Cuba since 1984, effectively liberated from prison, or else we would have Assata up here as well. And Comrade Mutulu Shakur there in the center left, who was convicted for the 1981 Brinks robbery that was carried out to appropriate money to fund the African Liberation Movement. And along with Marilyn Buck, he was convicted for playing a role in helping Sister Assata Shakur escape and gain asylum in Cuba. And then we have Rochelle McGee, who I talked about briefly, who was involved in the August 7th, 1970 incident at the Marin County Courthouse here in California, just a short distance from where I'm talking to you from right now. And of course, Comrade Brother Jamil Abdullah Alameen, formerly H. Rap Brown of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Kwame Ture, who was the chairperson of SNCC before Jamil Abdullah Alameen, used to tell us all the time that the police told them in SNCC, in the Black Panther Party, that we will never stop trying to get you. We will never stop trying to get you. That the police told them during the 1968 rally in support of Huey P. Newton, who was incarcerated for the shootout that ended up in the death of Oakland police officer John Frey, The Kwame told us that on the steps of the Oakland Alameda courthouse, the police were yelling, "We're going to kill that Huey Newton if it takes us 20 years." That was 1968. And Huey P. Newton, of course, was murdered in a very questionable situation in 1989 on the streets of Oakland, allegedly by a member of the Black Guerrilla family, which ironically was an organization founded by George Jackson, a Black Panther Party member. So, there's a lot we can talk about what doesn't make sense about that. But the point here today is that these folks have spent decades in prison, not because they were putting drugs in women's drinks like Bill Cosby, not because they were sexually assaulting young girls like R. Kelly, not because they were doing absurd things that many of us, because we're just as sick as those sick and twisted individuals that did those things, we defend them, not because they were doing ridiculous things like that, but because all of these people had dedicated their lives to standing up against this state. And a lot of people hearing this and a lot of people not hearing this don't have the courage to stand up for anything, don't stand up for anything ever. So we understand that it's difficult for some people to understand people like this that we're looking at on this screen right now, because you don't stand up for anything unless it's something to benefit you personally. That's the only thing that you have any emotion towards and any desire to do anything. It's willing to take any risk is if there's a personal benefit to you. Whereas these people paid this price that they're paying, not because of any personal benefit for them, but because they had the spirit in their heart to recognize that they certainly are their ancestors, and their ancestors never stopped to take a breath in fighting against this backward system. And when you understand that, you know that whatever you have is a result of that struggle. So nothing belongs to you personally. So when you have that level of consciousness, then you know that you can never take the position that, well, I can't take any risks because somebody took a risk for you to be able to stand there and say something as stupid as that. So you have a responsibility to take some risks that are bigger than just something that can benefit you. And that is what all of these people represent. That's what Black August represents. That's what its expansion to talking about mass incarceration and ending that terrible system represents. And that's what our struggle for liberation represents. And so, again, Geronimo nailed it on the head. All people in prison are political prisoners. And I think people get confused and don't understand that because the way capitalism trains you, you think that politics just means bourgeoisie electoral politics, the Democratic Republican Party, the Labor and Likud Party, that nonsense. But that's not the definition of politics. That's just one manifestation of politics. The definition of politics is the struggle to gain power over the forces that control our lives. That's the definition of what politics are. They're the forces that are organized to control our lives. So that sometimes means electoral politics, but most of the time that means just engaging in a day-to-day struggle to win power for the masses of oppressed humanity. That's the definition of politics. So when Geronimo makes that statement that all people in prison are political prisoners, don't come at us with this foolishness. Well, some of them people, they need to be in prison. That's not what we're talking about. And if that's all you can derive from that statement, that's the best you can do, then find a dark basement somewhere and lock yourself in it, because we need to move to a much higher level of understanding and commitment to move forward. We don't have any more time for that kind of foolishness that's been masquerading as some sort of logical opinion and viable position to take in regards to our oppression as a people. We got to move forward. We don't have any more time for that nonsense. So clearly what the man was talking about when he made that statement is that this system is based on exploiting the masses of people on earth. And so by virtue of that, it has to identify the people who represent the highest threat to their ability to maintain their system of exploitation. And the mass incarceration system is nothing except a vehicle to ensure they can continue to incarcerate the people who represent the biggest threat to their ability to maintain control. Now, you and people out here are worried about, well, did they commit a crime or didn't they? The people in power, the capitalist power structure, they're not concerned about that, because to them, all of us are criminals. No matter what you do, no matter whether you break any of their stupid laws or not, they still consider you a criminal. That's why they will shoot you for wearing a cake cutter in your afro. They will shoot you if you have a suit on, if you take what they believe to be a wrong move, or if you say the wrong thing. It has nothing to do with what you're doing. It has to do with who you are. And the reason why we don't understand that is because we don't know who the hell we are. We think that we're Americans. So because we are confused and think that we're Americans, we don't understand why we don't have these rights that are supposed to be promised to everybody that's an American. And that's your problem right there, is that you don't understand that you have never been an American. You weren't kidnapped and brought here to be Americans, and you will never be an American. You are an African that was kidnapped from Africa. And because of that, even if we are confused about that, the enemies we have are not confused about that. And so they see you as a threat because they know that there's always the potential that one day you could awaken from this deep slumber that you've been in and recognize that until Africa is free, I'm not going to be free. And the moment you recognize that and make a commitment to engage and commit your life to something other than getting high and acting a fool all the time, then that will mean that their days are numbered. And they know that. And because they know that, they got to do everything they can in their power to make sure you never come to know that. And we never come to know that. So this is what the spirit of these people should represent to all of us, is the fire to constantly remind us of everything that was just said. And that's what it means when it says all people in prison are political prisoners. And that today, with all of the strikes, the national strikes, the international strikes, and all the things that are carried out, all of that is a reflection of the need to point the finger at this system, this capitalist system on a worldwide basis. And that until we eradicate this system and build a better system, a socialist system, we name it. We're not afraid to name it. Well, I don't put names on stuff. Well, that's because you don't know anything. So the minute you put a name on something, now you're accountable to what that is. And you don't want that because you don't know anything. So you don't want to be accountable to anything. Well, we do the work. So we're not worried about being accountable. Yes, we are 100% scientific socialists. And yes, we are saying socialism is a superior advancement over capitalism. No question about that. So that's, of course, what we want. And you want it too. That's why you closed your bank account at the bank, and why you didn't got an account at a credit union, because a credit union is based in socialist principles and a bank is based in capitalist principles. That's why you did that. That's why you don't walk out to get your mail with a check written for the carrier, because you appreciate how that system functions. That's why you appreciate sending your children to a public school that you pay tax. These are socialist principles. So you want socialism too, but you just don't know it because the capitalist system has thoroughly indoctrinated you against the word. And we know we've not read one book about socialism in our lives. So we know we don't know what it is. So stop pretending and let's correct the problem. So yes, we want a socialist system. That's what all these people were fighting for, that we're looking at here. And we continue to fight for that because that's what we need, you all. That's what the struggle is about. So in terms of supporting those who remain incarcerated, like Ruchell McGee, Jamil Abdullah Alameen, Leonard Peltier, Matulu Shakur, Sundiata Akoli, all of those folks, and many, many, many more. Some of the things that folks can do is that there are many organizations like the Jericho Movement. We have their website there on the screen. You can connect with them. They raise money to support the families. They've been doing this for decades. They have letter writing campaigns. Critical Resistance is another organization that does that. They have these letter writing campaigns to folks. It's important to write folks who are incarcerated, especially if they're incarcerated for the reasons we're talking about. You know, we can't, people pay the price for us, and we sitting on here on social media talking about Bill Cosby. I mean, the hell with Bill Cosby. Write a letter to Sundiata Acoli or Jamil Abdullah Alameen. That's who you should be concerned about. Bill Cosby's been a piece of trash since the 60s, and that never has changed. I don't care what you say about the women accusing him. That's not, he was a piece of trash regardless, independent of that. No question about that. He's been detrimental to our people's forward progress for decades. And so you can never be able to convince me that someone who's a piece of trash on the left side of the street is going to come over to the right side and all of a sudden become a principal person that's being set up for, you might be naive enough to believe that, but I've never seen that in my life. If someone's a piece of trash, it's typically transfers to every area of their life. So understand about the people who deserve our respect, and let's support them. Write them letters, get involved in supporting their families. Those are things you can do on a day-to-day basis to support our political prisoners. And then we would argue a critical thing you can do is continue the work that these folks are doing. I mean, how are you going to say, well, I support political prisoners? You're not even in an organization. You're not even engaged in the type of work that they were engaged in. That doesn't make any sense, you all. You have to be engaged in a process to continue the work they were involved in. So that means you have to be in an organization. Unless you're the Scarlet Witch or Dr. Strange or someone, you have magical powers that you can free the people with. You know, I mentioned this a couple of weeks ago. A guy was telling me, I did a training a few weeks ago, and he walked up afterwards, you know, people do when you get done. And he's telling me, well, you know, I'm a shapeshifter. I said, oh, like the elf, the Marvel character, like he, you know, vanishes and then he reappears somewhere else. He's like, oh, better than that. You don't even understand this concept, but much better than that. I'm like, yeah, you're right. I don't understand it because I've never seen it. Why don't you show it to me? Well, I can't show it to you. You can't use it like that. I'm like, okay, well, you don't have to show it to me, but if you're not using your power, like if I had that power, I wouldn't be telling you that I had it. I would be going into banks, getting the money, giving it to the movements for justice. I would be using it to go in and spy on the secrets of the capitalist enemies, the FBI, police departments, the institutions, so I could bring them back to the movement so we could prepare for it. I would be doing all of that. I would be using the power for that. And since I know you're not doing that because we don't have that intel, then to me, your power is worthless. I'm not saying you can't do it. It's just worthless. It doesn't mean anything. So obviously, those folks who have these individual powers, I'm not saying you don't have them, but if you're not using them to do those types of things, what the hell good is it to us? So the only way I know, because you haven't shown us anything different, is you have to be working with other people to build capacity so we can work together. That's our strength, is working together. And so carrying that work and being involved in organizing work is the only way that can happen. So if you're not doing that, you're not honoring these people. You're not paying tribute to Black August. You're not honoring all these people. You're not honoring the San Francisco 8. You're not honoring the political prisoners in Azania, South Africa. You're not honoring any of these folks who paid this price, because they will tell you that there's not a book written by the former Black Panther Party members that doesn't say you have a responsibility to continue the struggle. You could bring any one of them to me. Revolutionary Suicide by Huey P. Newton. This Side of Glory, David Hilliard. Ready for the Revolution, Kwame Ture. You can bring me Seize the Time by Bobby Seale. You can bring me Will You Die With Me by Flores Forbes. A Taste of Power by Elaine Brown. Asata by Asada Shakur. I've read all of them, you all. And I'm telling you, and I've met and talked to most of them. And they all say that we have the responsibility. Geronimo Gijagas, I can't remember the title, but that one as well. All of them say we have a responsibility to continue the struggle. Not one of them says, well, you know, we went to prison, we died, we did all this. So, you know, you don't have to do anything. Just get a petty bourgeoisie job, buy a house, buy a camper, buy an RV, and that's all you have to do. Go on vacation to Europe. Don't even go to Africa. Just go on vacation to Europe. That's all you have to do. That's all you're responsible to do. Just spend money. Go out and eat crab and lobster, go to concerts. That's all you have to do, comedy shows. That's all you're responsible for. None of them said that. So if you really honor these people, this is what you have to be dedicated to doing. And Kwame Ture's statement that we are so weak that we leave our soldiers on the battlefield, he's talking about the people we just saw in the previous slide. We do nothing for them. We have no support system for them. Most of us don't even know who they are. So that's something that you can correct. So again, a lot of this, it's, you know, we're talking about the need to continue this struggle. So we're going to tell you about some things that we're just asking you to let people know about at this stage. Please, can we do that? Just let people know this stuff is happening. At least one person. If you don't know one person you can let know about these things, then go stand in a park, make up a leaflet that has this information on it, and go pass out 10 of them in a park. Stand in front of a supermarket and pass them. Do something. As Apprentice Bunchy Carter said, do something. Even if you just spit, do something. So that's what we're asking you to do. Just let at least one person know about these activities. So this is our ancestors' voices. And next Sunday, August 15th, from 4 to 5 p.m. Pacific time, we are going to talk about why some quote unquote Black people, so-called Black people, we're Africans, but so-called Black people reject African origins, try to say that they're indigenous to the Western Hemisphere and don't want anything to do with identifying with Africa. This is a disgrace. And we're going to talk about it because it's not entirely the fault of those people. What is their fault is that I've never met a single one who knows a single thing about African history. That part is their fault. But the fact that they came to that place is not their fault, because this is the miseducation of this capitalist system. So we're going to be talking about that. And this is not just something for African people. It's certainly for African people, but it's not just for us, because those of you that are not African, you've been indoctrinated with anti-African propaganda just as much, if not more, than we have. So you need to tune in to this discussion as well, because it is a critical discussion in understanding the forces that impact our lives. And we have resources there in the center of the page on the left. We invite you to join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Go to our site, aprp-intl.org. Say you click on the button that says you want to join. They will show you a short video, and then it'll direct you to someone that will follow up with you, and we'll talk to you about orientation. You don't have to commit to do anything, but how can you say you don't want to do something you don't know anything about that something? You know, people come to the party, they participate in one half of a session, and then they want to say they think they know everything about the APRP. That's absurd. At least come to an orientation and get some information and know what it is. And if you're not African, you can't join our party because we're anti-colonial. And so that's our work. But you can join some organization. And I have a young person I'm working with that came, European person, came to the APRP orientation back east. I didn't do the orientation, but comrades back east. And they told this person that they couldn't join the APRP, but they directed the person to me because of my book and the contents in it. And I had a meeting with the person. And so we're organizing. I had the person, told them to go out and get as many people as they could. And we'd have a meeting and we talk about how Europeans need to organize Europeans for revolution. And so this young person is doing that. So don't tell me, well, you can't organize white. I've organized white people, more white people than most white people. And that's not even the focus of my work. So don't tell me that. So go to abetterworld.me. While you're there, donate. You can look at all these videos. They're housed there, going back 80 weeks. You can see them. This one will be housed there just shortly after we get done in a couple of seconds here. And then hoodcommunist.org is a site where I'm on the editorial team. We have a dedication this month to Black August. We will be talking this week more about Black August. We have a Telegram event every Thursday at 4:30 Pacific time, 7:30 Eastern time. Really invite you to download Telegram and join that. We're going to be talking about how COINTELPRO manipulated the August 7th, 1970 incident in the Marin County Courthouse. Most people don't know about that, so we're going to be talking about that. So download Telegram if you don't have it. We have Telegram because they kicked us off of Twitter. They kicked Hood Communist off of Twitter, so we went to Telegram. They will never stop us. So download Telegram and join us so you can participate with us. And then we have all these broadcasts you see here, our Pontula broadcast, podcasts on Mondays, our comrades on the East Coast of the plantation, Revolutionary African Women Raw last Saturday of each month, Forward Ever podcast on Spotify, and then our comrades in New Mexico, the weekly newscast Thursday at 12 noon Mountain Time. Tune in to all of those as well as ours, our Ancestor Voices, every Sunday, 45 p.m. Pacific Time. Continue to buy my book, A Guide for Organizing Defense Against White Supremacist, Patriarchal, and Fascist Violence. That's what I'm going to present to the young European comrades I just talked about, have them read it collectively, and then help them build a political education list. You don't think I'm just talking about this stuff. I'm doing this work because this is the work that needs to be done. So we need help doing this work. So help us do that. Please buy the book, participate in these resources, tell people about all this, tell at least one person every week different about all of these resources. If you do that, that's a tremendous contribution. That's a beautiful thing. So we appreciate you all. Pay homage all week, all month to Black August. There are a number of programs. Join our Hood Communist program on Telegram Thursday. In regards to that, COINTELPRO against our Black August comrades from Marin County in 1970. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday evening, you all. We appreciate you joining us for this. Think about the sacrifices our people made and think about what kind of way you can build on that with yourself. That's what we need to do. So even if that's just telling one person about all these things, that's a great contribution. So do that. Don't just say you're going to do it and then eat a big meal and fall asleep and forget about it. Do it. Actually follow through and do it. That's what we need to have folks do. And if we all are doing that, you can already imagine what kind of major contribution that would make towards helping us build. Want to just close by giving honor and respect to our comrade, Sister Libertad from our wonderful family of El Partido de Raza Unida. We love you. We appreciate you. We thank you. This is your land. We're going to help you get it back from these colonizers as we're getting our land back. Forward ever, backwards never. Everybody stay strong. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. Crush and destroy patriarchy and homophobia. Capitalism, you already know, it's got to go. Stay safe. Forward ever.